The hum of the Boeing 777's engines was a low, meditative drone, the kind of sound that usually lulled me into a deep sleep before the wheels even left the tarmac. I had spent the last 3 weeks in London, closing a grueling merger that had cost me more sleep than I cared to admit. My reward was a single, glorious business class seat for the 11-hour trek back to Los Angeles. I settled into seat 4A, reveling in the extra legroom and the crisp, white duvet waiting for me. I was wearing my most comfortable, albeit slightly oversized, gray hoodie and a pair of worn-out joggers. I probably looked more like a college student heading home for spring break than a corporate consultant, but comfort was my only priority. Just as I was about to reach for my noise-canceling headphones, the peace of the cabin was punctured by a sharp, rhythmic clicking of high heels and a voice that sounded like it was being projected from a megaphone. "This is unacceptable, truly," the voice boomed. I looked up. Walking down the aisle was a woman who radiated a very specific kind of entitlement. She was draped in a beige trench coat despite the cabin temperature, carrying a designer tote that she swung with little regard for the shoulders of seated passengers. Behind her followed a teenage girl about 16 who looked like she wanted the floor of the airplane to open up and swallow her whole. "Mom, please, it's fine, it's just a seat," the girl whispered, her face flushed crimson. "It is not just a seat, Chloe," the woman snapped. She stopped at row 4, my row. She looked at her boarding pass, then at me. Her eyes raked over my hoodie with a look of visible distaste. "You're in my daughter's seat," she stated. It wasn't a question, it was an accusation. I blinked, momentarily confused. I pulled my boarding pass from the seat pocket. "Actually, I'm in 4A, is that what your pass says?" She snatched the paper from my hand before I could react. After a second, she huffed and handed it back. "Well, she's in 22F all the way in the back, near the toilets." She said toilets as if she were describing a toxic waste dump. "I am in 4B, my daughter needs to be next to me, she has flight anxiety." Chloe, the daughter, looked at the ceiling. "I don't have anxiety, Mom, I have a phone and headphones, I'll be fine." "Nonsense," the woman said, turning her gaze back to me. "Since you're traveling alone and clearly don't care much for aesthetics, I'm sure you won't mind swapping with her, it's the right thing to do." I've dealt with difficult clients for a decade, so I knew the forced volunteer tactic well. I gave her a polite, tired smile. "I'm sorry, but I specifically booked this seat weeks ago for the lie-flat bed. I have a very long work week ahead of me and I need the rest. But I'm sure the flight attendant can help you find 2 seats together in economy if there's space." The woman's face turned a shade of mottled purple. "Economy? I paid for business class, I am a Premier Gold member, do you have any idea how much I fly?" "Probably a lot," I said calmly, putting my headphones around my neck. "But I'm staying in 4A. She let out a theatrical gasp. "The selfishness of your generation is astounding." She didn't move. She stood in the aisle, blocking the flow of traffic until a flight attendant appeared. Her name tag read Elena, and she possessed the kind of calm, professional aura that suggested she had dealt with everything from engine failure to mid-air weddings. "Is there a problem here, ladies?" Elena asked, her voice like silk. "Yes," the woman, whom I had now internally dubbed the Karen, pointed a manicured finger at me. "This young man is refusing to let a mother and daughter sit together. My daughter is a minor and has medical needs. He needs to move to 22F immediately so we can be together." Elena looked at me, then at the woman. "May I see both of your boarding passes?" She checked mine first. "Mr. Miller, you are indeed in 4A, and ma'am, you are in 4B, miss." She looked at Chloe. "You are in 22F. Elena handed the passes back. "Ma'am, the flight is completely full. Unless this gentleman wishes to trade, which is entirely his choice, the seating remains as assigned." "This is ridiculous," Karen hissed. "Look at him, he's wearing a sweatshirt, he probably used points or got a fluke upgrade. I paid for this seat, my daughter deserves to be up here more than some backpacker." Elena's expression didn't flicker, but I saw her eyes harden just a fraction. "Ma'am, please take your seat in 4B, the aisle needs to be clear for boarding." The woman sat down in 4B, huffing and puffing, while Chloe slunk off toward the back of the plane with a final, apologetic glance my way. I felt bad for the kid, but I wasn't about to give up an $8,000 seat because her mother was a bully. An hour into the flight, the meal service began. In business class, this was a choreographed affair of warm nuts, linens, and multiple courses. Elena arrived at our row. She laid a white cloth over my tray table with practiced grace. Mr. Miller, for your appetizer, would you prefer the seared scallops or the heirloom tomato tart? The scallops, please, I said. Karen, sitting next to me, didn't wait for her turn. I'll have the scallops too, and bring an extra portion of the lobster thermidor. My daughter is in the back and I know they're just serving those horrible little foil trays back there. I'll be taking my meal back to her. Elena paused, her tongs hovering over the cart. I'm sorry, ma'am, we are catered specifically for the number of passengers in this cabin. I cannot provide a second meal. Then I'll give her mine, Karen snapped. But she won't eat that cold salad. I want her to have the hot entree from this menu. Just swap the trays, it's not hard. I'm afraid that isn't allowed for safety and service reasons, ma'am, Elena said. The meals in economy are already being served. Karen leaned across the console, her voice dropping to a low, menacing hiss. Listen to me, I'm a very influential person. If my daughter doesn't get a proper meal, I will make sure your supervisor hears about your lack of flexibility. Now bring the scallops and the lobster. Better yet, she looked at my tray, which Elena had just set down. He hasn't touched his yet, just give me his. He doesn't look like he has a refined palate anyway. Give him the economy meal. I froze, my fork halfway to my mouth. I looked at Elena. I expected her to give the standard, I'll see what I can do corporate line to keep the peace. Instead, Elena straightened her back. She didn't raise her voice, but it took on a crystalline clarity that seemed to make the surrounding passengers go quiet. Ma'am, Elena began, I have been very patient. You have insulted this passenger, you have attempted to disrupt the boarding process, and you are now asking me to take food away from a paying guest to give to someone in a different cabin. I am a gold member, Karen shrieked. And Mr. Miller is a passenger on this aircraft with the same rights to his meal as you have to yours, Elena replied. Furthermore, per FAA regulations and company policy, business class catering is for business class passengers only. If you continue to harass the staff or the passengers around you, I will have to notify the captain and file a report of passenger interference. That would result in you being met by security upon landing. The cabin was silent. Even the clinking of silverware in the rows behind us seemed to stop. Karen's mouth hung open. She looked around, searching for an ally, but everyone else was suddenly very interested in their movies or their wine. She turned back to Elena, her face a bright, indignant red. How dare you speak to me like that? I want your name, I want your employee ID. Elena didn't flinch. She reached into her pocket, pulled out a small card and placed it on Karen's tray. Here is my information, ma'am. Now would you like the scallops or should I move on to the next row? Karen sat back, crossing her arms tightly over her chest. I'm not hungry anymore, you've ruined my appetite. Very well, Elena said. She turned to me and her expression softened into a genuine, warm smile. Mr. Miller, would you like a refill on your champagne and perhaps an extra chocolate truffles for dessert later? I would love that, I said, finally exhaling. Thank you, Elena. The rest of the flight was blissfully quiet. Karen spent the next 8 hours staring stony-faced at her screen, refusing to speak to anyone. She didn't even go back to check on Chloe, who I later saw walking to the restroom. The girl looked remarkably peaceful, probably enjoying the break from her mother's intensity. As we began our descent into Lax, the cabin lights dimmed. I felt refreshed, well-fed, and strangely invigorated by the display of backbone I'd witnessed. When the plane finally taxied to the gate, the usual scramble for overhead bins began. Karen was the first one up, shoving her way into the aisle before the seatbelt sign had even turned off. She grabbed her designer tote and stood by the exit door, her jaw set, ready to storm off and find the nearest manager. As I stood up to grab my backpack, Elena caught my eye. She was standing by the galley, making sure everyone was exiting smoothly. I lingered for a moment as the crowd filtered out. Thank you again, I said softly. I know that wasn't easy, people can be a lot. Elena leaned in slightly, a mischievous glint in her eyes. Between you and me, Mr. Miller, she isn't even a gold member, she's silver, and she booked her seat with a companion discount. I laughed. Well, she certainly had the confidence of a CEO. Confidence is one thing, Elena said, adjusting her scarf, but kindness is what gets you the extra truffles. I walked down the jet bridge, the California sun streaming through the windows. I saw Karen ahead, frantically waving down a ground agent, her voice already rising in pitch as she started her rant. But the agent just looked tired, nodding along with the same practiced patience Elena had shown. I walked past them, feeling the weight of my backpack and the satisfaction of a restful flight. I thought about Chloe, who was probably still somewhere in the back of the plane, taking her time to avoid the inevitable storm. Sometimes, the world feels like it's designed for the loudest person in the room. We're taught that if you scream loud enough or act important enough, rules will bend and people will break. But every once in a while, you meet someone like Alina, someone who knows exactly where the line is and isn't afraid to draw it in the sand. As I stepped out into the terminal, I realized I didn't care about the upgrade or the luxury seat as much as I cared about that moment of justice. Karen tried to get my meal upgraded to hers, tried to treat me like a footnote in her own story, but the flight attendant shut it down. And in doing so, she reminded me that no matter what class you fly in, some things, like basic respect, aren't up for negotiation. I headed toward baggage claim, a smile on my face, ready to go home.